Why am I covering this game when it's not part of the Seiken Densetsu series? Well, the confusion it caused. I mean, there are still people out there who, like me when this game came out, thought it was part of the Secret of series. And if that's the case, I am way overdue on that Secret of Nim video.
If you want the ultra-short one-sentence story on Secret of Evermore, it's the better Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, an RPG built from the ground up under a Japanese video game company for a Western audience. Square actually told the development team to make a monolith game with a heavy American feel to it. They didn't give any guidance on what specifically to do beyond that.
Americanize a mana game, so they threw guns, fat people, and cheeseburgers into it? Not American cheese though, that shit's disgusting.
But what made Evermore attract and retain the audience it did? Whereas Final Fantasy Mystic Quest was made by Square, Secret of Evermore was made by Squaresoft, the company's US branch located just down the road from Nintendo of America. In fact, since Squaresoft was primarily a publishing operation, this was the first and only game they developed for the SNES. And unless I'm mistaken, it's the one Square game released everywhere except Japan. It's okay, they got Seiken Densetsu 3 the next month.
There was a misconception for a while that the West got this game instead of Seiken Densetsu 3. As in, the resources that would have gone toward localizing that went toward making this. That's not the case. There were many reasons why Seiken Densetsu 3 didn't get localized, and I'll cover those in the next video.
How did this game come to be? Secret of Evermore started life around 1989 as a different concept. Vex and the Mesmers. It also wasn't conceived by Square, but by a Broderbund programmer, Doug Smith, shortly after making Lode Runner. It was going to be a game about magic users telling stories about dreams, then teleporting listeners into those dreams virtually, and someone named Vex getting stuck in one such world and corrupting everything. This was around the time when virtual reality was piquing a lot of people's interest, for better or worse. Usually worse. Smith was hired by Square for their US development office, and he hired Alan Weiss to assemble the game's staff, another Broderbund employee who worked as a producer on games like Deadly Towers. And marketing for games like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? As you might have guessed from that last bit of information, compared to the prior Mana games, Evermore had an entirely different team. Guys who played significant roles in past Seiken Densetsu games like Hiroki Kikuta, Kenji Ito, Nasir Jabeli, Hiromichi Tanaka, and of course Koichi Ishii weren't involved. Another reason this is considered separate from the rest of the Mana series. Aside from, not having a sacred sword or mana related things anywhere in the game. Many people who worked on Evermore were up-and-comers or people just getting started in the business or adapting to new roles. Daniel Dokyu got his start with Evermore as a concept artist and art director. Weiss added Brian Fedro as a designer, the first time he'd held that position and according to him, quote, "my first job in the industry." He also added writer and designer George Sinfield, who previously worked on games like Wayne's World, and helped write and edit the Star Tropics sequel and Breath of Fire.
Okay. He does know what a decent game looks like. Crisis averted.
Due to personal reasons, the Vex part of the name was dropped. Specifically, and don't laugh, it's not funny, Sinfield had a friend in high school whom changed his name to Vex, and according to Weiss went, quote, "on his quest to conquer his own little world," unquote. Shit, it's a good thing I'm not on camera so they can't see me smirking. Oh, fuck! Anyway, once the Vex part was dropped, it was decided they had to rename the game. From here, there are two stories on what happened. Alan Weiss says they held a naming contest and the name Evermore was the most popular. This is disputed by the game's composer, Jeremy Soule. Yes, the same guy behind the scores of several Elder Scrolls, Dungeon Siege, and Company of Heroes games composed Secret of Evermore's soundtrack, his first game soundtrack, at the age of 19. He sent demo tapes to Square and 2 weeks later, started work at Squaresoft. In an interview with Music for Games, Jeremy said that as he was leaving the office, he wrote the word Evermore on a whiteboard, just because he liked the sound of it. Allegedly, the staff saw that and decided to work it into the name. Which then begs the question, where did the secret of part come from? Some allege that Square added this at the last minute, as in a month or two before the game's release, to try and boost sales by association with Secret of Mana. But considering Nintendo Power's January 1995 issue includes a preview calling it Secret of Evermore, over 8 months before its release, that decision would have been made much, much sooner. In truth, Fedro stated the game only got the Secret of part of its name about 2 months before the game went gold and they started printing copies.
Time to start correcting those Wikia entries, Square Enix fans!
It's more likely the Secret of came from the game being designed similarly to Secret of Mana, what with the similar combat and the reuse of the ring command system. That doesn't mean, however, that they simply copied the source code into Evermore. On top of not providing guidance, Square also didn't provide any of the code used in Secret of Mana, meaning the Squaresoft team had to build the game from scratch. Fedro stated, quote, "There was some reason why we had to develop from the ground up, but to be honest, I can't remember what it was. I think it was one of those strange, we're wholly owned but separate for tax purposes sorts of things."
There are only two sure things in life: death and taxes.
As such, the game engine was built from the ground up. And then another engine was built from the ground up. Despite being designed for the SNES from the start and initially having a smaller scope, the team redesigned the game again to be much larger. They were originally supposed to fit the game on a 12 megabit cartridge. Then it went up to 16. Then they got approval to go to 24 megabit cartridges, the same kind used for games like Super Metroid, which may have upped its retail price even if you weren't buying the PAL version which came with a strategy guide. Even then, it required a fair bit of compressing to fit on the cart. That's assuming you noticed it came out, because unlike Secret of Mana, there were a lot of big names releasing around the same time as Evermore's October 1st, 1995 North American release date. About a month earlier, Castlevania Dracula X and Killer Instinct released. 2 weeks after Evermore, Mortal Kombat 3 released. 3 days after Evermore, Yoshi's Island came out. And the day before Evermore hit store shelves, Mega Man 7 released. That being said, you might have seen a TV ad like this at the time.
Secret of Evermore from Squaresoft.
Heavy emphasis on might, because even though I was watching a lot of TV at the time, this was around when The Tick, Spider-Man, Power Rangers, the X-Men cartoon were airing on Saturday mornings, and despite my family having a subscription to Nintendo Power where I know I read something about the game, I forgot it existed until I saw it on store shelves.
The game begins with a flashback to 1965 in the town of Podunk, USA. Yes, Podunk. I guess the name "Don't Live Here Unless You Really Have To"ville was already taken. An experiment wraps up inside a ridiculously large estate, but it goes wrong and blows up in everyone's face. Thankfully, the blast was localized entirely within the estate, or everyone just rebuilt the town and stopped talking about it 30 years later. The boy comes out of the... I see what you guys did there. Wait, they let him take his dog into the movie theater? Did he lie and say it was a service animal? This kid, by the way, can be called anything up to 15 letters. As he gushes about the movie he just saw, his dog chases a cat down the street. I see what you did there, guys. Doug Head Software in the same building as Smith's Hardware. Doug Smith. And yes, that is his likeness on that sign.
I'm on to you!
The dog somehow loses the cat and runs into the abandoned estate. The boy finds him, but the dog keeps running deeper inside until they find a secret passage leading to a machine, which is apparently powered by plot convenience. It switches on when the boy gets near it, his dog chews on some wires, and both of them get electro-teleported away. The boy comes to as a man named Carltron.
But when I see you hanging about...
No, Carltron, not Carlton. Tells him he has to leave, then dumps the boy into a room with a bazooka and a couple attack drones. After a simple battle, he stumbles upon his dog in some kind of partially broken escape pod, and they eventually crash into a primitive land, conveniently destroying both the pod and the bazooka.
I guess this is a step up from just having someone steal your equipment at the beginning of the game. Right, Death?
His dog shows up but looks way different, because in Evermore, his appearance adjusts to fit the world around him. Don't question it, you will not get an answer. The dog fetches a bone, which becomes your first weapon, and the game is off and running. Right away, this looks like Secret of Mana style of gameplay, even down to the ring command system and the bars at the bottom of the screen. However, the menus tend to be less colorful and have a lot more text, similar to something you'd see in, say, Final Fantasy VI. Funny enough, the in-game text is a slight variant of the text used in games like FF6 and Chrono Trigger. Combat is generally the same as in Secret of Mana, but with a few odd quirks. For one, this game is single player only. No teaming up with a friend or two here. 2. Hit stun for enemies and player characters is generally much shorter than in Secret of Mana, making it harder to get a series of full-strength attacks off without repeatedly switching between the boy and the dog. 3. You can't push enemies or NPCs like in Secret of Mana, so if you get cornered, you have to fight your way out or just wait. Enemy AI also tends to behave quite different, with most enemies moving in for one attack and then running away, which can make close-quarter combat more annoying. The wide arc of some weapons not counting as part of its hitbox doesn't help either, particularly with the axe. The last thing I'll mention for now is the action grid, which is quite oversimplified compared to Secret of Mana. The only options for the boy are aggressive and defensive, while the dog has search and fight. These don't account for things like proximity to enemies or waiting for attacks to recharge. So if they're set to be more aggressive, either character will jump face first into enemy attacks, or repeatedly attack before recharging and do very little damage. Even when set to defensive or search, AI characters frequently get way too close to enemies and take unnecessary hits. I know the action grid in Mana had its issues, but I don't remember having as many problems there as in Evermore. What is nice though, is that the dog and the boy don't have to be on screen at the same time, and the game takes advantage of this to solve puzzles in several sections. The dog's search skill is for finding alchemy ingredients, alchemy being this game's take on magic. When you get alchemy recipes, they require various ingredients you can purchase from vendors or find in the field. The dog's search skill can help find these ingredients there or in towns, but he rarely ends up pinpointing the location of the invisible item drop. Other times he'll pretend to be tracking down ingredients, then just bump into a wall and stop. I frequently had to move around spamming the attack button, hoping he would eventually pick something up, spinning around as I did because the direction you face also affects whether you find it or not. At several points, I simply couldn't find it despite the dog's help.
Hey man, where'd you put the popcorn packs? I need them for the movie tonight.
Oh yeah, they're just in the far right cabinet.
Are you sure about that? Because I'm looking right now and there's nothing there shaped like popcorn.
Well, that's where I last smelled them. They gotta be around there somewhere. Found them! Oh yeah, where were they?
They were underneath the car.
Yeah, see, I was close. Eventually, the kid and his dog end up fighting a group of raptors, a somewhat abrupt introduction to how combat will play out for much of the game. Unlike Secret of Mana, Evermore tends to focus more on hit and run tactics than anything else when it comes to melee, baiting the enemy into attacking and then trying to hit them before they move away. For this fight and this fight only, there are two possible outcomes. Either you fend them off and get an extra healing item and some money, plus some armor from a random townsperson if you talk to them, or the boy runs out of hit points and the dog, whether it was already KO'd or not, drags you away to the nearby village to recover. There you meet Elizabeth, or as the village calls her, Fire Eyes. They call her that because she somehow uses her glasses to make fire. Not quite like that. It's here I first noticed the way the text boxes display in the game. They don't display names, rather just hover near the person who's talking. According to a Nintendo Power article, this is cinematic text, which was innovated to quickly and smoothly display text and dialogue, and it certainly seems to do both. Here you finally get to name your dog, and find out the village alchemist Strongheart went missing in a region called Bugmuck. She offers to help the boy get back to Podunk if he brings the missing village alchemist home, then gives him his first alchemy spell, Flash. Alchemy spells require ingredients to work, and how many times each can be cast depends on how many ingredients you have for it. Alchemy spells can be found throughout the game, with some being found as part of the main storyline, and several optional spells, usually the more powerful ones, found off the beaten path. There are 34 total recipes to find, made with 22 different ingredients. You can only have 9 recipes active at a time, though some are just more powerful versions of other spells, like Super Heal. You can only equip them by talking to certain NPCs throughout the game, usually the people who give you alchemy recipes. So if you run out of ingredients in the field and need to switch, too damn bad.
And now you're getting an idea of how annoying it can be to level grind spells when you can only have about 1/4 of the game's alchemy recipes active at any given time. Assuming you find all of them.
Several alchemy spells are tucked away in corners of the map, hidden in plain sight on unassuming background pieces, or require backtracking to find, and some of these are rather important recipes. For example, if you don't backtrack to this hut, you will go through most of the game, and possibly all of the game, without the Cure recipe, which in this game heals status effects. Yeah, in Evermore, Cure and Heal have the opposite functions of what I'm used to from almost every other RPG. Back to the village, much like Fire Eyes' hut, the inn, item shop, and armor shop aren't marked, so you'll only find them through trial and error. Fortunately, the last couple towns in this game are much better about giving you a clue where things are. When it comes to dying, unlike becoming a ghost in Secret of Mana, if the dog runs out of HP, he continues following you around, but doesn't attack anything and doesn't get targeted by enemies. You can still control his movement, but otherwise he just lounges around until you revive him, usually by giving him a dog biscuit. Not doing anything you want him to until given a treat? Man, it's like that really is my dog in the game. If the boy runs out of HP though, it's game over. You know, we saw earlier that the dog can drag the boy to safety if he's hurt, so why not have that happen instead? Drag him back to the nearest town or the last save point instead of kicking back to the title screen.
You might have noticed I haven't stopped calling him the boy yet.
Boy.
That's because unlike Final Fantasy Adventure or Secret of Mana, the boy, the main protagonist of the game, was never given a proper name. Even the instruction book doesn't have a name for him or the dog. Whether you think that's better or worse than FF Adventure calling their characters hero and heroine, that's completely up to you. But don't worry, his not having a proper name complements his complete lack of a personality.
This kid is reason number 2 I don't like Evermore as much. He's a huge fan of sci-fi movies, and it is his only defining character trait at the beginning and end of the game. He makes sure you know how much he loves them by quoting them every goddamn time he holds a conversation longer than 10 seconds. And it's always a made-up movie, because for copyright reasons, they couldn't reference actual films. So when he spouts a quote, it just falls flat because most of the context isn't there. Unless you're playing the German version. That was translated by a different group and not checked for legality, so it made references to real works and people. For the North American version though, it's like if I were to say something along the lines of, "As Captain Alex once said in Who Baked My Beans, your taste is as terrible as your haircut." That doesn't mean anything, I would just be someone so socially inept I could only communicate via crappy movie quotes.
Because normal, well-adjusted people only communicate in video game quotes.
Beyond that, he's just completely vacant, going from point A to point B because, well, the game says he should. He has zero reaction to the world around him and the people in it outside of, "Wow," or, "Oh, well, that's a thing." Even at points in the game when he should, in theory, express something resembling an emotion, Like when he loses his dog and is alone in a strange and dangerous world, he just says, "Aw shucks," spouts a movie reference, picks a direction to walk in, and moves on. It would be one thing if he were a secondary character or part of a group, but he's the main player character for the whole game. The dog emotes more than he does.
But all that said, he's not the main reason I don't like Evermore as much as Mana. That would be the grinding.
The first two Seiken Densetsu games were pretty good about not needing to grind between areas, either for experience or money. Spells were a bit worse, but even then I never found the need to level those up a bit, or at all. Secret of Evermore, not so much. Just getting by on the enemies along the way to each destination is less of an option. I still did it whenever I could, but usually just survived by the skin of my teeth. You start off with less health, and overall level progression is slower than in Secret of Mana, but everything else is a snail's pace by comparison. And remember how Secret of Mana had some kind of sound effect or music cue for leveling up or getting better spells or weapons so it really felt like you were accomplishing something? Evermore has plain text. As an aside, stats are also more simplified compared to Secret of Mana. Attack, defense, magic defense, evade percentage, hit percentage, that's it. That's half the stats available in Secret of Mana. Now back to the grind. When you do get charge levels for weapons, your movement speed isn't affected like in Secret of Mana, so it's easier to pull them off and avoid getting hit while charging. However, weapon levels only gain a single point for each enemy killed, and you don't gain points if the other character gets the kill shot. As such, you'll likely have the dog max out at weapon level 3 before leaving the first world, and not progressing beyond then because, well, dogs don't carry weapons. Meanwhile, the boy gets various swords, spears, and axes. Yes, there are only 3 types of weapons as opposed to Mana's 8, and the bazooka doesn't train up at all of which are separate and have to be leveled individually, unlike Secret of Mana, where weapons are forged into new weapons and carry over their level progression. The result is if you gain weapon levels with, say, a spear, and get a new spear which is technically stronger, you would likely keep using the old one, because it can do more damage with the charge attacks. Even though some weapons are needed to break through barriers, they typically were only slightly stronger than melee weapons in which I already had a charge level or 2. I went through the entire game with several weapons that never even reached the first charge level. This is supposedly helped by only having 2 charge levels for each weapon, as opposed to Mana's 8. Except that the weapon system wasn't supposed to look like this. Fedro revealed that they had a completely different weapon system in mind, but management told them to just copy Secret of Mana's system partway through development.
It would explain why the weapon system seems so oddly unbalanced, but base level and weapon grinding are far from the only types of grinding in Evermore.
The one thing that may help with grinding is that in most areas, enemies can respawn from just off-screen. Of course, this can completely screw you over if you're low on health and or supplies, but you know... Never mind, I don't have a positive spin for that. Alchemy spell ingredients need to be ground for, by either buying them or finding them in the field, usually 1 or 2 at a time, with everything capping at 99. Alchemy spells level similarly to magic in Secret of Mana, but unlike Secret of Mana, where spells are grouped by elementals and all the spells level up together, each alchemy recipe needs to be leveled separately. And of course, there is money grinding for equipment, ingredients, and items. Even after beating the raptors and getting a money bonus, when I got to the first village, I could only afford 1 piece of armor. This is offset slightly by Evermore's habit of rewarding exploration. Several items and some armor pieces can be found as random drops from enemies, in containers scattered around the map, or by talking to various NPCs. There are even a couple instances where you can enter a room filled with a few strong enemies and get rewarded for clearing them out, which is nice, except for when it happens after I went grinding for money to buy the same armor piece. On the way to Bugmuck, there's a cave you can get to by falling into a certain sand trap. Inside is a guy who gives you the Jaguar Tooth Ring, which allows you to run. Yes, the boy is incapable of running without this charm. This is something Evermore does better than Mana though, because you can change directions while running, and run while the gauge isn't at 100%. Anyway, after seeing why it's called Bugmuck, you venture inside a giant exoskeleton, get through a collapsing paths puzzle, and confront a giant bug named Thrax. Get it? Like thorax? Like the middle part of an insect's body? Hey, the dev team liked it enough to have it as the box art. It's supposed to be a moderate challenge if you aren't a certain level, since the weak point is behind the ribcage, but...
Remember in Secret of Mana how you could effectively lock enemies in place by chain casting magic? Well, Secret of Evermore has a version of that which is arguably far more broken. Alchemy spam.
When you control the boy, there's a delay on when you can cast the same or different alchemy spells again. However, if you control the dog and cast spells for the boy, the delay is completely gone, meaning you can cast the same spell multiple times with almost no delay up to when the spell's animation starts on the enemy. If you're quick, you can fire the same spell off 8 times. I say this is more broken than Secret of Mana's system for 3 reasons. 1. Secret of Mana limited your magic points according to your level, usually starting at around 10 and slowly going up. So unless you did a lot of grinding or had a full stock of fairy walnuts, you wouldn't be able to chain cast the entire fight. Evermore has no such limit, so you can stock up ingredients and spam away. 2. Mana had a damage cap of 999. Evermore has no damage cap, so you can rack up thousands of points of damage with alchemy spamming. And 3. You couldn't do it against every boss in Mana because you don't get magic until about 1/5 of the way through the game, and the final boss can only be damaged by the Mana Sword. In Evermore, with one exception, you can do this against every single boss.
And I did.
After destroying Thrax, you find an axe and break Stoneheart out of a cocoon. And Fire Eyes thanks you, but says the volcano north of the village is cooling down, and it could cause an ice age unless it heats up again.
Because if we're gonna die horribly, we want to be burned alive instead of freezing to death. Wait, why did I just give them an accent?
The boy just wants to find a way home, but Fire Eyes says this could help find that since she's from Podunk, and her grandfather is the reason why they're here. He invented a machine that would send people to worlds based on their imagination, and since Elizabeth likes prehistoric things, her world looks like this, and she's been living here for 3 decades. I guess people don't age thanks to this machine? She suggests going to the center of the volcano to see if some outside influence is at work. Then she gives you some call beads. Think of these as Final Fantasy summons, but you can choose one of 3 types of summons for 4 special NPCs you meet throughout the game. This little prick asks what a girl can do to help him, and she promptly puts him in his place by nuking the fire pit. You see the first enemy palette swap within the first 2 hours of play, before running across some lizard people called the Vipers in the Mammoth Graveyard, who want you dead for trespassing. There was supposed to be more than one mammoth skull in this graveyard, but they were allegedly removed because enemies would keep getting stuck on them. Anyway, after committing cold-blooded murder, you get a spear, and find out the Vipers usually live in the volcano, but were raiding the graveyard for parts. The guy opens the gate and gives you the heal formula,
And if that was made an optional recipe, I would have flipped my shit.
before you start ascending with some air vents. The catch is, you need to find a hidden vent to get to the top of the volcano, and you find it by attacking this out-of-the-way patch of grass. The dog will sniff at it if you stand still in that area, but the first time I found it was by accident while chasing down an enemy. One of the vents launches you up to the top of the volcano where you meet some guy. He says the only way into the volcano is through its crater, which they're standing on somehow, except for the catacombs underneath it. He says you can levitate the big rock blocking the entrance out of the way, but it requires mud peppers from the swamp east of the volcano. So you drop hundreds of feet back to the ground and wander around a swamp full of unusually strong frogs, until you find a guy trying to get rid of Salabog, a giant swamp snake. If you don't have the charged spear attack or a lot of alchemy ingredients stocked up, this fight is ridiculously hard, because Salabog spends most of its time out of range of normal attacks, and when it is in range, it's because it's attacking. Even if you come prepared though, it's ridiculously time consuming. Several pokes to the snake's face later, it dies. The man introduces himself as Blimp, so named because he gives you a mud pepper, needed for the levitate alchemy recipe.
Or at least that's my best guess. I mean, there is flying later in the game, but Blimp has nothing to do with it.
You levitate a boulder out of the way and walk into the base of the volcano. The intense heat and ash burns the boy alive, and the dog takes over main character duties. Or at least that's what should happen. By the way, every time I change locales in this game, just assume I keep going back to the nearest village or town to rest and restock. You'll pretty much have to load up on items at every opportunity in Evermore, most of which I haven't explained yet. This won't take long though. Evermore has fewer items than Secret of Mana. Aside from dog biscuits and call beads, petals, nectar, and honey all heal for various amounts of health, essence heals all status effects, wings warp you to the entrance of whatever dungeon you're in, and then there's the most useful item, pixie dust.
Yes, in a world built entirely on science and/or alchemy, wings and pixie dust are items.
When pixie dust is used on the boy or the dog, if they take too much damage and end up dying, it'll revive them instantly with a little extra hit points. A nice item in theory. I only have one little problem with this. A few times I tried using it didn't work. Anyway, you wind through a bunch of paths looking for mud peppers to levitate other rocks because Blimp only gave you one.
It's not directly addressed in the storyline, but he doesn't sell you more than one mud pepper here, because if he did, the volcano level wouldn't be long enough.
Defeating a really dumb Viper commander or two gets an extra mud pepper to help clear a path through the volcano. Well, once you backtrack to where it's used. It also reveals an awful waterway puzzle where... Wait, why is there a network of water pipes in the volcano? These paths branch several times and dump you into rooms, most of which just have an enemy and sometimes an item drop. You have to find two rooms in particular, one with a door and another with a switch to open the door. It's pure trial and error, and, if you're like me when I played it in the 90s, leads to drawing out a map to weed out which paths didn't lead to either. At the heart of the volcano, the boy finds Fire Eyes. He also finds Fire Eyes. See, it turns out she has an evil twin.
I'm your clone. Who are you? My clone.
Stop.
Then who am I?
No, evil twin does not equal clone. Yet.
Liquid Fire Eyes is cutting off the volcano's heat, which can eventually cause the world to freeze over and the Vipers to take control. She then sends Magmar after you. No. This boss can be challenging normally, particularly with it being able to jump in the lava and heal itself. But with a decent stock of hardball and flash ingredients, he doesn't put up much of a fight. After he's gone, not Fire Eyes releases the valve on the volcano's water heater, I guess, and suddenly the volcano gets really hot and starts exploding.
So in other words, the volcano is behaving like a volcano. Also, friendly reminder, that Viper that was nice to us before is probably dead.
The boy and his dog get blown out of the volcano, I guess someone at Squaresoft was a fan of Joe versus the volcano, and land in a raft, which goes over a waterfall. Can we count this as something else lifted from the Seiken Densetsu games? The first two both did this. The boy wakes up on a beach, and it's here a quirky little mechanic comes into play. There are 4 different lands in this world, but unlike many RPGs, each land has its own form of currency. The last area used talons, and this one uses jewels. Of course, with the exchange rates, you usually end up cutting your money in half with each change.
I like to imagine someone at Squaresoft stood up at an Evermore meeting one day, really proud, banged their fist on the table and said, "You know what this game needs? You know what would be fun? Those currency exchange booths that rip you off at airports."
And Blimp is here too, along with the head of Salabuk. Why is he taking that thing's head with him? Meanwhile, in Nobilia, Max somehow got sucked into a fountain pump and turned into a greyhound. No, I mean an actual greyhound. He wanders into a palace right as a shady-sounding ruler talks about becoming more powerful by finding the diamond eyes of the Sacred Dog statue, a move which the people won't support without a sign from the mythical Sacred Dog. I wonder what Sacred Dog they could be referring to. Wait, is that the same cat he was chasing at the beginning of the game? Blimp sends off the boy with a new attack alchemy formula, Crush, so he can wander through the desert looking for a city where he might find his dog. One of the first things you find here is a skeleton in a boat, offering rides to the other side of the desert, but he doesn't accept money. He wants an amulet of annihilation. There's a guy in Crustacia who sells one, but he wants 10,000 jewels for it, so odds are you can't afford it.
If you do buy it, though, there's a chance he'll give you a rare item with the amulet, like a magic gourd or a chocobo egg, or... What, you thought we would get through the whole game without at least one Final Fantasy reference?
Also, is an item called the Amulet of Annihilation something you should just throw around as currency? Anyway, the skeleton is also an example of something else Squaresoft worked into the game. A censorship filter. If you name your character something, shall we say, colorful, and then try talking to him, he criticizes your name and asks for 3 amulets to cross the desert instead of 1. After running through the desert for about 3 minutes, you arrive in Nobilia and are immediately thrust into the trade market. There are a couple dozen booths, all offering items you have to trade other items for, but you don't have those items, so you have to find the booths that let you use jewels, and if you don't have jewels, then you're screwed and none of this matters. Then you have to trade those items for other items, find out you don't have enough of that item, and go back to pay more jewels for items to get more other items, so you can put all that toward another item, then go back for more items to get the other item, and use all those items to get a rare item for one of the booths. Repeat this 8 times.
This concludes today's economics lecture. Be sure to bring 5 bags of rice, 3 chickens, and 4 pots for tomorrow's class.
In case my prior explanation wasn't clear enough, this area is a confusing mess of vendors, some of which can only be reached by ducking through a building one screen over. Some have visual cues for what they sell, some don't. On the first visit, you're all but guaranteed to get lost and not accomplish much, partially because there are way too many trade items to worry about. Rice, pots, perfume, spices, beads, chickens, tapestries, tablets, spoons, scarabs, but mostly because of a 15-minute time limit which starts once you enter the city. When that timer expires, the booths close and everybody leaves. Thankfully, there's a chance to go back and figure everything out later. But this happens right before a sequence leading to a boss fight, so it's like the game's taunting you with all the rare items being put right in front of you. If it's any consolation, when you get the pots, there's a random chance of something being in one of them. At the town square meeting, the boy's dog is presented as the sacred dog, and he's asked to select a challenger in the Colosseum. Of course, he picks the boy, and everyone's okay with this kid getting forced into gladiatorial combat. In the Colosseum, there are tons of stop! Hello there, Locke, Mog, Realm, Strago, Terra, and Umaro from Final Fantasy VI. This and the Chocobo Egg are 2 of the more known Final Fantasy references in Evermore. But I have a question for you. Who are these 2? They look like the same type of sprite as the FF6 ones, but they aren't from that game. I've seen everyone talk about the FF6 sprites, but these 2? Nothing. They're only on screen for a couple seconds, and those couple seconds have been eating at me for decades now. Who the hell are they? The champion, Vigor the Indestructible, gets introduced. Have I mentioned the tone of this game is all over the place? It hints at being dark and oppressive, then either breaks the fourth wall or throws in a comedy spot. It's like if the Army of Darkness setting had the script of Bill and Ted.
It got into my hand and got me a passing grade on my history report. Wild stallions.
With alchemy and or the spear toss move, this fight's really easy. I got hit more by the crowd throwing food than I did Vigor's attacks. The apparent reward for winning is a gladiator sword, but the boy just wants to know how to get back home. This guy, Pompolonius, the advisor to the city's ruler, tells the boy to find the diamond eyes of the sacred dog statue in the lands west of the river in Crustacia, and with them, Nobilia's ruler can send them back. So yes, Pompolonius manipulates the boy into doing his dirty work for him. And he's never seen again. Now that that's over, the market is fair game, offering a couple new armor pieces, such as the obsidian helmet. The real draw, though, is an assortment of rare charms, like armor polish, which boosts your defense, the Jade Disc, which ups your hit percentage, the Sunstone, which increases your attack rating, or the Moxa Stick, which increases the effectiveness of healing items and alchemy recipes. Items like these feel almost necessary, the Jade Disc in particular, as without it, the miss rate of melee attacks is atrociously high. Your hit rate starts off ridiculously low. Mine was 31 at level 3, and by the time I hit level 13 and got the Jade Disc, it skyrocketed to 39%. Hell, at level 25, my hit rate was a staggering, godlike 45%. However, some of these rare items flat out don't do anything. For example, the Silver Sheath is supposed to boost your attack when a sword is equipped, except a glitch in the game means it's active all the time, even when you don't have it. The Magic Gourd is supposed to... actually, nobody knows. Like the Silver Sheath, it doesn't actually do anything, but unlike the Silver Sheath, there's no explanation or idea of what it's supposed to do. According to Fedro, the idea was to either have it do nothing, or something so obscure it's virtually unnoticeable. After the game's code was checked, it's the former.
Alternate names for this item included the Mystics You're Wasting Your Time sack, and the Spiritual Bag of Developers Pointing and Laughing at You. But Magic Gourd just rolled off the tongue easier.
I should note that I'm glossing over a lot of glitches in this game, simply because there are way too many, even for a video of this length. For example, if you save and quit with a spell effect like Higher Defense active, when you reload, your stats revert to normal, but the spell stays active. When it wears off, your stats permanently drop. The same applies to status ailments. If you get a weapon level to 3, charge it, then start running, you can run forever. There are 2 places in the game where you can find a call bead, but you can just stand still and keep mashing B to pick up 99 of them. While I never got him to this point, when your dog gets to the 50s or 60s in levels, he'll start skipping levels and take longer to reach the one immediately after. While it's nice not to have the screen stop scrolling if one character hits the edge of the screen, the dog can wander to areas you're not supposed to go, and when you switch to him, you'll skip portions of the game. And lastly, there's the money glitch. If you get more than 16,777,215 of any currency, the counter rolls over and you end up with nothing. There are other much worse glitches, but I'll save those for when they show up later. Before you leave Nobilia, it's worth talking to the Doomsday Prophet a few times. He doesn't do anything useful, just completely break the fourth wall and get turned into an animal of your choosing. Speaking of animals, pretend this is a Zelda game and don't taunt the chickens. This game is very protective of its chickens. If you survive though, feel free to taunt the goats. One thing that is consistently good about Evermore? The soundtrack. It's well done in general, let alone for a composer who was working on his first game. While technical limitations meant Soul couldn't do everything he wanted to, in part because it would slow the game down, he did haul a bunch of his music equipment back to Iowa, where he and his brother played all the parts of each track and pieced everything together. The result is a pseudo-orchestral arrangement, but Soul went a step further and incorporated ambient sounds into several tracks. Crowd noise in the market, waves lapping the shore of Crustacea, hell, some of Prehistoria's tracks are just straight up ambience. The sounds bring the environment to life, and the music complements it, setting the mood well.
It's no wonder I keep looking for excuses to put Secret of Evermore music in my videos. Though if you're looking for the physical soundtrack, be prepared to pay a lot for it. If you can even find it.
After using the dog to clear the gap in the bridge and operate a rope lift, I don't know, just go with it. The boy finds an archaeological dig site headed by a guy named Horace Highwater. He correctly guesses the kid's from Podunk because, well, so is he. Horace used to curate Podunk's Natural History Museum, and so this world is modeled after his imagination. Here you find out he, Elizabeth, and a librarian named Miss Bluegarden were all friends of Professor Ruffleberg, and participated in his trial run of his Evermore device.
So remember what I said earlier about how the soundtrack and the environments were a strength of Evermore? The characters and the story are one of its biggest weaknesses.
Just from this alone, I have 3 questions. 1. Why would Dr. Ruffleberg invite his friends over to be guinea pigs for his Evermore project? Try it with one willing participant first, then move forward. Preferably one that isn't your fucking granddaughter. 2. Why would they agree to an experiment which involves standing in front of this machine and getting electrocuted until they phase out of existence? 3. If it sends them to their own separate worlds, how come they're all just plots of land right next to each other? Real estate in Evermore must be a nightmare to get into.
It's awfully small.
I'd say it's awfully cozy.
That's dilapidated.
Rustic.
The boy brings up the diamond eyes, to which Horace explains how power-hungry Nobilia's mysterious ruler, who's only been there for a few weeks, is. He tells the boy where to find them and says to bring them to him instead, giving him an alchemy recipe to see the path over the pits blocking the way to them. At the pyramid to the south, you split the party. The stairs are too steep for the dog to climb, so the boy lets the dog in below with a pressure switch before climbing himself. This is one thing Evermore has over Mana. It has a few clever little sequences where you switch back and forth between the boy and the dog to progress. Here you use the dog to open some doors so the boy can pass through the maze. Along the way, he has to deal with these annoying winged skulls, which swoop down and fly off and are generally a pain in the ass every single time they show up. Unfortunately, this area is also horrifically buggy. Federal mentioned spending about a month trying to debug this one section and, evidently, still not finding some pretty egregious bugs. For one, these Cobra guys are kind of tough, except for one thing. If you approach them from the left or right, they will never attack you. The same goes for their mini-boss palette swaps, which give you the bronze axe, used for breaking down stone barriers. As for less beneficial glitches, there are sections where you cross stepping stones and they collapse behind you. After getting your dog back, you're supposed to use them to go back to another part of the pyramid, but this can happen. In fact, you can get trapped in parts of the maze if it happens. If you don't have wings to get out of the maze, you have to reset. If you do have wings to get out of the maze, you still have to reset. The game won't let you split the party anymore, and these floating bridges are still gone. Anyway, you get to fight a dreidel named Rimsala, while various statues around the room try to cast flash on you. You could probably guess how I won this fight. Now with one diamond eye, the boy goes north to the Hall of Colossia, which is slightly less maze-like and includes more revealer paths, switches, and MXC challenges.
Next up, Schwermaganoose. Ooh, and he takes a spill. Let's take another look at that. A courtesy lounge attendant at a Detroit Lubin rinse. You can see right there his misstep. Oh.
One new spear later, you open a new path and pick a fight with Magmar with Megator. Now having both diamond eyes, the boy meets Horace. Not questioning why he's suddenly in his St. Patrick's Day clothes, the boy hands over the diamond eyes and not Horace walks off shouting and laughing evilly. The boy starts to suspect, oh fuck off with your non-movie references. He just assumes the guy will go to Nobilia and, in case you're wondering, Horace isn't at his usual place in the camp. At least they tried making this somewhat of a mystery. The market is empty because everyone is in the town square, watching the ruler of Nobilia and Horace's evil twin.
You're not you! Who are you if I'm not me? I'm you, but I'm not me!
Proclaim his newfound power before inserting the diamond eyes into the dog statue. It breaks apart to reveal a bootleg Darth Vader helmet. This, supposedly, is the Aegis.
Not exactly the most intimidating portrayal of the Aegis I've ever seen. Weeaboo trash.
For something that's supposed to wield unimaginable power, it's pretty easy to destroy, even without alchemy spamming, and with it summoning Dino World versions of your dog. Horace shows up afterward and they look at the statue's energy core, which could explode at any moment. They get a barbarian named Tiny to throw the core out of town, and he's so strong it gets well away from the city before exploding. Horace admits he's not sure how they can get back to Podunk when his buddy Madronius says the core's explosion opened a tunnel to a new land back at the dig site. Having nothing else to go on, the boy heads that way and finds the river has dried up, letting him jump off a cliff and fall down a What? Do we really need to throw these two down another waterfall? Well, he's dead. After dying, the boy and his dog navigate a ridiculously dark underground maze filled with teleporters.
Because if you can't see where you're going, it helps you forget that this is yet another maze after 2 prior maze-like areas.
Then you fight an Aquagoth, which is really challenging until you spam it to death in under a minute. A bucket gets lowered and the boy is pulled up into the land of Gothica. Same goes for his dog, which now looks like a poodle. Being one of his smaller forms, his regular movement speed is the highest of the 3 so far. Oh, and be sure to drop the bucket and pull it up again. The oglin you fish out pays off later on. Gothica is actually divided into 2 areas, the first being Ivor Tower, the happiest place in Evermore because the Queen says it is, and a market asking for the same goods you'd find in the Nobilia market. Unlike the Nobilia market though, you have to get at least 1 item from this market to proceed, and it requires an Amulet of Annihilation. The Queen here has been acting strange lately, being obsessed with cleanliness and building this town so she could move everyone out of their old home, Ebon Keep. Also, the king has gone missing.
I wonder if some sort of evil twin queen could be behind this.
In addition to the market, there's a back alley where you can buy or trade for better armor, as well as rare items you traded away in Nobilia's market. It's a weird safety net of sorts for players who don't trade for certain items in Nobilia, which makes me wonder why they couldn't make it so you didn't trade them away in the first place. The item you need from the market is a ticket to the Exhibition of Cultural Oddities. If that sounds familiar to the sideshow from the early portions of Secret of Mana, don't be ridiculous, that show didn't have curtains. This one does. One of the acts is a horrific beast called Mongala, which, when there's nothing behind the curtain, he claims has escaped and the boy should be very careful. It sounds as fake as everything else in the show, especially the pig poodle, but like the sprite child in Secret of Mana, he was telling the truth for once. Conveniently, the town's pig race starts as the dog runs onto the track and wins. And yes, no one can tell at a glance that it's a dog with a pig mask on.
Is it too late to switch my dog's name to Clark Kent?
The prize is dinner with the queen and a bunch of stuffy aristocrats. Well, for the boy at least. For the dog masquerading as a pig, they tried to cook him for the main course of said dinner. Did you like that maze where you couldn't see anything? Well, good news, the dog escapes through another dark maze. This one with a bunch of open vents leading to different parts of the castle, divided up by a series of locked doors. Even when you get the key to these doors, you're a dog. You can't use it. It's for the boy to use later to pick up a bunch of items. When you finally do make it out, the dog crashes the dinner party and the queen flips out, throwing the boy and the dog into the dungeon. In this dungeon, a gaping hole in the wall lets the dog slip out and open the door. Then things get weird. Apparently the dungeon is full of monsters from all over Evermore, including a mini-boss from the Hall of Colossia, a viper from Prehistoria, and a flying attack drone from the beginning of the game. Oh, and one of the cells is just a massive pit leading into the sewers.
How is it the Queen is so paranoid about everything being clean and in working order, and yet the dungeon cells have holes in them so big that people can crawl or even walk through them?
Not only is it a sewer level, it's a maze sewer level, where the water not only pushes you around, but damages you if you're in it for too long. The sewer somehow leads right back into the main hall of the castle.
What?
And they're immediately caught and brought to the Queen, who wants to talk to them. She mentions her old home, Ebon Keep, and how some townsfolk stayed there. She wants the boy to open the drawbridge so her troops can march in and force everyone out, to which the boy agrees because he has nothing else to do. Unlike a guy you'll find out later is the king, who's completely hypnotized by a puppet show called The Show of Life by Billy Shakespeare? That's not even a pun name, that's just dumb. To get to Ebon Keep, you must cross through a hedge maze. Yet another maze. Well, at least this one's short. At the center is a chessboard with a knight which... Hey, he's moving diagonally! That's against the rules! A path opens underground, and you see an energy core like the one which blew up earlier. And welcome to yet another maze. If you see this thing in the trees somewhere, you took the right path to get out of the forest. If not, retrace your steps and try again. And have fun against those dragons. They're arguably worse than the skullbats. Not as bad as the shapelifters though, which stop you and take on the boy's form 3 times for a mini-boss fight. And yes, they can use alchemy too.
And yes, the evil twin gag is getting really old.
One new sword later, you're back in another goddamn forest maze. However, that Oglin you rescued from the well is here too, and he gives you the Wizard's Coin, which increases your magic defense. Or is it alchemy defense? I don't know, this game isn't consistent at all about calling it alchemy or magic. Hey, the forest is suddenly a lot brighter and easier to never mind it's dark again. One fairly easy dragon fight, and a new lance later, you're in another sewer. At least this one doesn't have poisoned water though. This leads to the dungeon of Ebon Keep, and another horrendous glitch which can softlock the game. There are a bunch of raptors and spiders and robot gunners in the cells, but the last one you open is supposed to lead into town. However, if you open the cell in the upper left last, the exit never appears, and you're stuck in the dungeon until you either reset or get a mosquito to bite you to death. When the exit does work, you arrive in the desolate remains of Ebon Keep, home of abandoned houses and... Cecil Harvey from Final Fantasy IV?
Supposedly Cecil is the only official Final Fantasy cameo in this game. The others, like the FF6 characters in the Colosseum, were stuck in by the developers and nobody told them to take them out.
He even references Baron Castle, Zeromus, the final boss of FF4, and Rosa, who he married before moving here. Also, if you haven't played Final Fantasy IV, pretend you didn't hear that last sentence. Yeah, they spoil part of the game's ending with this cameo. He sells armor he found on his adventures, but none of the armor pieces are actually from FF4. He gives you a discount if you say you remember him, but even if you don't, he gives you a bazooka and a single thunderball shot. I'm guessing that's not from Final Fantasy IV. The bazooka is useless for now because you only have one shot and I just wasted it. After looting every house not blocked to... Oh. Inside the castle is what some Evermore fans claim to be the hardest boss in the game, the Verminator. Hard because he's out of range of normal attacks and can inflict plague, a status effect like poison, except it never wears off and does more damage the longer it's present. But there's alchemy spamming. The boy recognizes Ebon Keep's castle is just like Ivor Towers, except more run down, and he meets the real Queen Bluegarden. How is he still surprised by this evil twin shit? Also part of the Evermore experiment, Bluegarden recounts how the imposter showed up, locked her up, and rendered the king a couch potato with her puppet show. She says her friend Tinker can help the boy get home, but first he has to deal with the fake Queen Bluegarden. He fights off Tinker's security system, and I'll admit, that line got a smirk out of me. As for Tinker, the boy explains what happened to him, and the techie thinks he knows how to get to the place from the beginning of the game. You see, he has to launch the boy into outer space.
Now if the dog goes too, do they have to name the craft Sputnik 5? Yeah? Wait. Hold on. What do you mean it's going to go over everyone's head because there's little to no crossover between Secret of Evermore fans and 1950s space race enthusiasts?
They spy on the imposter queen, somehow able to hear them talking about a strange energy source they're looking for, likely the one seen earlier under the chessboard. By the way, the boy's design has been said to be inspired by Marty McFly in some regards, what with the similar vest and the pants, but just to muddle things further, he uses some of Marty's sayings, like this one.
Whoa, this is heavy.
After getting a new lime-flavored axe, the boy breaks down the barricade he passed earlier and ascends a tower populated by pallet-swapped maggots and dragons. One with dead ends and breakaway platforms to undo your progress. It's a more annoying version of the Bugmuck platforms. At the top is a fight with another dragon, only this one regularly carries the boy over the edge and drops him further down the tower. As he climbs back up, the dragon is still using alchemy on him. As far as I'm concerned, this fight can die in the fire the dragon keeps casting. The fight is broken up by Tinker's brother Gomi. The tower is his attempt to reach as high as his dragon friends fly. He agrees to help you overthrow the fake queen by having his dragon, Sterling, give you a lift to the sewers beneath Ivor Tower. In the theater hall, the queen sends her puppets, Mephista and Old Nick, after you. You know, these puppets are adapted from Satan and Mephistopheles, both characters from the Faust legend, and whose play adaptation focuses on a guy who turns to the dark arts when science and religion fail him. So is it ironic that I'm nuking them into oblivion with what could be considered a dark art?
Or am I just overthinking this Super Nintendo game aimed at preteens?
The puppets respawn until the bookcase explodes, and Mongala appears. The evil sideshow monster was a bad guy the entire time. Wait, why am I surprised by that? Mongala keeps respawning the puppets, one of which heals him, with more and more health each time. Even so, it's a fairly simple fight as Mongala stands still and occasionally uses one of two alchemy spells. Once that's done, the imposter tries to belly flop you to death. It goes even worse than expected.
That pause you heard between the falls, according to Brian Fedreau, was a reference to a TV show called Count Duckula. When Secret of Evermore came out, Count Duckula had been off the air for 2.5 years.
The boy finds evidence that the evil queen was a robot, and the king rushes in to give him a golden shower. What? What did you think I meant by that? Fake queen damaged the supports of the castle, causing part of it to collapse as everyone leaves Ivor Tower to go back to Ebon Keep. Also, the king wasn't really the king, just a guy who wanted to pretend he was. At the castle, Tinker lands his flying machine called the Windwalker. This isn't for going into space, but rather flying back to 2 prior lands to find parts for the spaceship. Because apparently, a valve wheel and a pressure gauge don't exist anywhere else in Evermore, and the Diamond Eyes somehow weren't destroyed when the statue exploded into a pillar of fire. And whatever happened to that energy source the fake queen mentioned before? In case you're wondering, no. The Windwalker doesn't compare well to Flammy from Secret of Mana. For one, Flammy was usable earlier in the game, but that aside, the Windwalker can only land at designated fire pits and stays there, whereas Flammy could land on any open land and in towns, and could be called upon any time the player was outdoors and not in a boss fight. And as an aside, don't try landing at this corner of the map with the Windwalker. It causes it to disappear, and you can render the game unwinnable if you save afterward. Back in the Land of the Lost, the boy... Oh, what's happening? Oh. Okay. The boy tells Fire Eyes about the other Podunk people and a possible way back, and she tells him to check out the Bug Muck. When asked if someone else could be causing all this trouble, she adds that the only other person there for the experiment was the robot butler.
Yes, I think I get it now. It was the butler in the experiment room with the candlestick.
After doing the same falling bridge puzzle as before, you meet Thrax 2.0, called Coleoptera. No, I don't know why this thing is named after a beetle when it looks nothing like one. Instead of a person in the cocoon this time, it's a wheel. Oh wait, we're looking for a valve wheel. Toss this one out, we gotta keep looking. Fortunately, the geysers don't lead you into the now quite active volcano, just a platform with a pot on it holding the pressure gauge.
Let me see if I understand this. The volcano erupts, destroys the machinery inside, forces the pressure gauge out of the top, and it flies and it flies and it flies and it lands in this container. And then the lid for the container also gets shot out of the volcano and lands perfectly on top of it.
Also, talk to Strongheart while playing as the dog. He'll give you the best collar in the game. Why he couldn't give this to the boy when talking to him, I don't know. One trip to Nobilia later, Horus says Tiny ran off to become the leader of the Oglins in the base of the pyramid. Ducking through the cave at the other end of the dry river, you end up at a place where you have to stand on 2 switches and levitate a rock onto the third to open the middle gate. What's that? You unequipped the levitate spell after not using it for several hours? Well, tough shit, go back and activate it. Tiny sends packs of Oglins after you, or rather, he throws them at you, as you wander around the teleporters until eventually teleporting to the top platform. Tiny relents and gives you the diamond eyes. Then the boy leaves. And then the boy leaves. The boy leaves? I said, and then the boy leaves.
If you're controlling the dog when you hit the teleporter, the game soft locks and you have to reset. That's what, 3 times now that the game is locked up or otherwise become unwinnable?
Now with all the necessary parts, Tinker has his rocket ship ready to go, and the, quote, minimal chance of survival, unquote, doesn't faze the boy at all, because he is just as hollow as the rocket he climbs into. The rocket lands on Omnitopia, a futuristic space station, and the dog gets turned into a robot with, oh, shut up with your movies, will you? It's at this point that the dog becomes far and away the best character in the game. He's much faster, his short-range leap attack gets replaced by rapid-fire laser beams from his eyes, his charge attack is a back-mounted laser cannon, he can run forever and not get tired, and he can make toast.
Prehistoria, Antiqua, Gothica, and Omnitopia. That's 4 worlds. But there were concepts in place for a 5th world that was based on Valentine's Day. Although that one got scrapped because it didn't really fit with the rest of the game. And there were also plans in place for Secret of Evermore to ship as a cartridge that had a slot in the top of it. And they would sell sub-cartridges that would fit in there, which would give you access to new areas. Though that never made it past the brainstorming phase. Although that might explain this island on the map that you can never visit.
It's a bit unfair to call this a maze, but I will say having to use the dog to destroy sphere bots to open doors constantly does not make this section any fun. Neither does having to crank the boy's action grid down all the way so he doesn't waltz into the hallway and get his face sliced off. There are several places here to find better armor and weapons, like the neutron blade from this friendly robot turret, or finding the best or second best helmet, vest, and gloves in the game. On the plus side, there's bazooka ammo here. Not only is the bazooka a viable weapon now, it's the only weapon you will ever need the rest of the game. See, every type of ammo the bazooka uses, except Thunderball, is completely broken. As long as you have 1 round of it in your inventory, it will think you have an infinite supply. There are a few things you have to do to access everything, one of them being finding and turning on this cooling station, or you can't pass by some of the red-hot coils in the adjacent room. Another has a series of switches used to disable an alarm and a force field. The same room has a light switch for the greenhouse and the storage area. Note that leaving the greenhouse light on will cause the invincible plants in there to one-hit kill you. None of these rooms are marked in any special way outside of a letter and number, so it's just trial and error finding out where everything is and what will or won't kill you. The alarm room switches can also be used to open a door leading to an optional boss. It's a pretty challenging fight by itself, made more challenging by the tendency for it to hard lock and force you to reset. And no, I don't know why Thrax's head is hooked up to a computer. After passing the murderous plants in the dark, the boy finds Professor Ruffleberg, who was observing him the entire time. He says what we already figured out, that his butler Carltron is behind everything. He sabotaged the Evermore experiment, then threatened to destroy Evermore if Ruffleberg didn't make robot clones of all his friends, leaving Carltron in complete control. The evil butler now sits at the center of Omnitopia, trying to salvage what's left of his plans. Ruffleberg suggests they need Carltron in order for everyone to get back to Podunk, and the boy can reach Carltron using the energy source under the chessboard in Gothica. With a new lance, you'll have no chance in hell of leveling fast enough before the final boss. The boy takes the escape pod and flies out to Gothica, grabs the energy core, which is apparently not going to explode despite shaking violently, and once back in Omnitopia, he backtracks all the way to where the rocket landed, puts the core in the machine, and warps to the final boss. And by final boss, I mean 3 mini-bosses, 1 regular boss, and then the final boss. Phase 1 sees the boy fight a wall of fans. As long as you don't fall back into the dropping explosives, this part is a breeze.
I'll let myself out, thank you.
Phase 2 sees a wall of TVs pop up and spawn a series of robotic raptors to attack you. Then a series of Ramsalas. Then your evil clones. By the way, don't kill the cleaning robot, that makes more enemies appear. Then the wall explodes and you face Not Magmar number 2, who fully regenerates his health if you don't kill him fast enough, because the build up to the final boss hasn't quite been long enough yet. Finally, Carltron shows up riding a giant machine gun rocket launcher of sorts. This might be one of the more disappointing final bosses I've encountered. Carltron just moves back and forth and shoots. If you're behind him, he farts explosions. That's it. That's all he does. Just wait for him to shoot, fire the bazooka, move out of the way, repeat. Once that letdown is over, Carltron appears and threatens you, only for Ruffleberg to hit his off switch and teleport him out of Evermore.
It was that simple the whole time?
They virtually project themselves into Evermore to see what effect Carltron's departure had, and the answer is explosions. Lots of explosions. Everywhere. You see, Evermore is going to collapse in on itself because with Carltron gone, the balance of the world is completely offset.
This isn't science or science fiction, now it's just straight up philosophy. So I'm gonna do what I did in college and just wait at the back of the room playing Steam games until it's over.
Ruffleberg guesses that removing the Podunk natives from the world will somehow restore this balance. Having no other ideas, the boy gets sent down to pick up the other 3 Podunk people and bring them back to the station where they'll warp back home. Each Podunk resident bids goodbye to the worlds of their creation, and they go home. Somehow the boy is lagging way behind despite being on the ship with everyone else, and he and his dog barely get out as the machine explodes. Back in Podunk, and back to normal, the boy and his dog wonder if it was all a dream, but the billing on the theater sign suggests otherwise. Everyone else, now 30 years in the future, wonders what will become of their worlds, and we see it as the credits roll. Strongheart takes over in Prehistoria, Madronius now runs Nobilia, the now real king oversees Ebon Keep, and the evil clone robots are part of the sideshow. Also, the game works the player into the credits in a pretty clever way that goes beyond the old "thank you for playing." There's more though. 2 minutes after the end appears, a scene plays out showing Carltron dusting the old Evermore machine. When Ruffleberg walks away, it becomes apparent Carltron hasn't completely gotten over his evil ways.
BAM! Sequel bait! They even put the question mark after the end.
And one last Easter egg happens if you wait another half hour at the screen. A credit saying Dolly Grip, Brian Fedro.
Dolly is the name of Brian's wife. I'm not sure how well received that was on her part, if she even knew this credit existed, but the game itself was received okay-ish, if I'm being polite.
Critic reviews tended to be in the 7 to 8 range, mostly 8s, with a few more critical of the game's presentation and not being up to the standards of Square's other works, whatever that means. While critically Evermore was okay, commercially, not so much. Exact sales figures are hard to come by, but that the game was never released in Japan is a sign that it didn't do so well. Also, despite teasing a sequel, Square's higher-ups nixed it as they saw the SNES market as being on the decline. The PlayStation launched in the US a month before Evermore's release. As for the development team, their Seattle office was closed for a new one in Los Angeles, and everyone went their separate ways, going to other studios like EA, Boss Game, and Humongous Entertainment, where Jeremy Soule would compose for several putt-putt games. Doug Smith would work on games like Body Harvest and Final Fantasy VII. One of these is a classic, and the other is Final Fantasy VII. George Sinfield would design a couple games, namely MechWarrior 3, before becoming a writer at Nintendo Power. Daniel Doku would become an art director for several titles, namely the Guild Wars series. And Brian Fedro, he'd spend over 15 years in the industry as a programmer and engineer for dozens of games. Despite having something resembling cult status, Secret of Evermore has never been re-released. Not on Virtual Console, not on anything. I can see why people enjoy it though. The environments and soundtrack are very well done, and it keeps most of the engaging parts of Secret of Mana's combat and simple ring command system. Some things it even does better than Mana. However, the less engaging characters, stale level design later in the game, mechanics which were changed at the last minute to ape Secret of Mana, and all the bugs which forced me to keep resetting prevented me from liking it more than I would have otherwise. For a first effort from a group of developers, it's quite good. As just a game though, it's okay.
And with that, it's time to get back to games that are part of the Seiken Densetsu series. But first, I have to do some light reading